A vet is called to check on a horse with unusual spots on its coat. At first, it seems like a rare condition, but as they take a closer look, they let out a scream of pure horror. What they discover isn't just a medical mystery. It's a sign of something far more disturbing, hidden in plain sight. How did this happen? And what shocking secrets will this horse uncover? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Dr. Harper unlocked the front door of her veterinary clinic. The familiar scent of antiseptic and fresh coffee welcomed her as she flicked on the lights. Her worn leather medical bag sat ready on her desk, packed with supplies for the day ahead. She hummed softly while reviewing patient charts, already mapping out her busy schedule. The sharp ring of the phone cut through the quiet morning air. Harper's hand hesitated for a moment before picking up the receiver. Valley View Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Harper speaking. This is Tom from Callaway Stables, a gruff voice responded. Mr. Callaway needs you here immediately. Something's wrong with Orion. Harper's jaw tightened. Callaway Stables meant dealing with Mr. Callaway himself, always a challenge. What are his symptoms? Just get here, the voice insisted before hanging up. 20 minutes later, Harper's truck crunched over the gravel driveway of Callaway Stables. The pristine white fences and manicured lawns couldn't mask the heavy atmosphere that hung over the place. A stable hand quickly looked away as she passed, his shoulders tense. The main stable door creaked open, revealing Mr. Callaway in an expensive suit that seemed out of place among the hay and horse equipment. His steel gray hair was perfectly combed, his posture rigid with authority. Dr. Harper, he said, his tone clipped, you're finally here. Follow me. She gripped her medical bag tighter, following him down the dimly lit aisle. More stable hands scurried out of their way, eyes down, bodies pressed against stall doors. Listen, Callaway said, turning sharply. Orion is worth more than you'll make in 10 years. Fix him and do it quickly. I have buyers coming this afternoon. They stopped at Orion's stall. The magnificent bay stallion stood in the corner, his coat dull and patchy. Harper stepped inside, speaking softly to the nervous animal. As she ran her hands along his flanks, she noticed strange, discolored spots scattered across his coat. Mr. Callaway, she said, leaning closer to examine the marks. These look like chemical burns. Has anyone been using new grooming products or... Chemical burns? Callaway scoffed. Don't be dramatic, doctor. It's probably an allergic reaction to hay or something equally mundane. Harper pressed her fingers gently against one of the spots. Orion flinched. This isn't normal. These marks are consistent with a busy horse that gets scrapes and bruises, Callaway cut in. Are you going to treat him or waste more of my time with wild theories? Harper straightened up, meeting Callaway's cold stare. I'll need to run some tests to determine the best course of treatment. Fine. Write up your recommendations and leave them with my staff. He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Harper alone with the injured horse and her growing suspicions. She packed up her supplies slowly, her mind already forming a plan to get to the bottom of what was really happening at Callaway Stables. The evening light faded as Harper spread her notes across her home office desk. Photos of Orion's mysterious burns glowed on her laptop screen, while medical textbooks lay open around her. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in her intense focus. This doesn't make any sense, she muttered, comparing the images to documented cases of common skin conditions. Nothing matched. The burns weren't consistent with allergies, fungal infections, or parasites. Their patterns suggested deliberate application of something caustic. Harper rubbed her tired eyes and opened another medical journal. The more she researched, the more certain she became. Someone was harming these horses on purpose. The next morning, Harper pulled into Callaway's stables just as the sun crested the horizon. She'd timed her visit early, hoping to catch the stable hands during feeding time. The pretext of a follow-up visit seemed reasonable enough. As she walked through the barn, she noticed details she'd missed yesterday. Several horses showed similar marks to Orion's, though less severe. They were easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. "Can I help you?" a quiet voice asked. Harper turned to find a young woman in work clothes, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her name tag read Emma. "I'm Dr. Harper, just checking on Orion and some of the other horses." Emma glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping closer. "I've been worried about them too," she whispered. "Especially Orion. He's such a gentle soul. Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Emma's hands twisted her work gloves. "I've seen things late at night. They bring in unmarked containers and—" She swallowed hard. "I think they're using chemicals on the horses to make them perform better." Harper's heart raced. "Can you tell me more about—" Well, Mr. Callaway's voice boomed through the stable. "I wasn't aware we'd scheduled another visit, Dr. Harper." Emma quickly stepped away, ducking into a nearby stall. Callaway approached, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "I was concerned about Orion's condition," Harper said firmly. Callaway moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Let me be clear, Doctor. You've provided your service, and now you're interfering with my business. I suggest you leave. Immediately." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Harper held his gaze for a moment before turning toward the exit. As she drove away, her hands shook on the steering wheel, but her resolve only grew stronger. Those horses needed help, and she wasn't about to back down. Harper moved methodically through her morning appointments at the clinic, checking vaccinations and treating minor injuries. But her thoughts kept wandering back to the mysterious burns on Orion's coat. The small envelope containing hair and skin samples from the horse sat in her lab, waiting to be tested. Between patients, she slipped into the clinic's laboratory. The samples lay spread under her microscope as she carefully documented her findings. The chemical residue was unmistakable. The damage wasn't natural. After running several tests, her heart sank. The results confirmed her worst fears. "This is definitely bleach damage," she muttered, making detailed notes. The burns showed all the signs of repeated exposure to a diluted bleaching agent. Someone was systematically applying chemicals to these horses. As the last patient left for the day, Harper called Lily into her office. Her assistant had been with her for 5 years, and if anyone would understand, it would be her. "Lily, I need your opinion on something." Harper spread out her findings across her desk. "Look at these test results." Lily's eyes widened as she examined the photos and lab reports. "These are from those horses at Callaway Stables?" She shook her head. "Harper, you need to be careful. Mr. Callaway practically owns this town. Remember what happened to Dr. Stevens when he tried to report animal abuse at one of Callaway's farms?" "I remember," Harper said quietly. Dr. Stevens had lost his practice after Callaway's lawyers finished with him. "But I can't ignore this, Lily. These horses are being deliberately harmed." Lily placed a supportive hand on Harper's shoulder. "I know you can't, and I'll help however I can. Just please be smart about this." That evening, Harper drove back to the stables, her camera hidden in her medical bag. She'd called ahead, claiming she needed to check on several horses for routine vaccinations. While examining the horses, she carefully documented every suspicious mark she found. When no one was watching, she slipped into the supply room, pretending to look for extra gauze. The room was dim and cluttered with equipment. Harper's heart raced as she moved deeper into the space, scanning the shelves. Behind some feed supplements, she spotted them, unmarked bottles and syringes hastily hidden from view. She quickly photographed everything with trembling hands. A sudden noise outside made her freeze. Footsteps approached the supply room. Harper quickly replaced everything exactly as she'd found it and grabbed some gauze from the front shelf. Just as the door handle turned, she pretended to be reading the label on a bottle of antiseptic. The stable hand barely glanced at her before grabbing some supplies and leaving. Harper waited until the footsteps faded before letting out a shaky breath. She tucked her camera deeper into her bag and walked calmly out of the stables, her heart pounding with every step. The morning sun cast long shadows across Emma's small front yard as Harper parked her car. The modest rental house sat at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling and shutters slightly crooked. Emma answered her knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. "Thank you for coming," Emma said, ushering Harper inside. The living room was sparse but tidy, with a worn couch and a few horse photos on the walls. Harper spread her evidence across Emma's coffee table: photos, test results, and detailed notes. Emma's hands trembled as she examined them. "This proves what I've suspected all along," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bleaching isn't even the worst of it." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold back the weight of her secrets. "Tell me everything," Harper encouraged gently. Emma's words tumbled out in a rush. "They inject the horses with all sorts of things. Painkillers so they'll run through injuries, stimulants before races. Orion," her voice cracked, "they push him so hard in training that he comes back bleeding sometimes. But Mr. Calloway just says he needs to toughen up." Harper took careful notes as Emma described the systematic abuse. Her stomach churned at each new detail, but she kept her voice steady. "We need to document all of this." Together, they developed a plan. Harper pulled out a small leather notebook and handed it to Emma. "Record everything you see: dates, times, what substances they use. Take photos if you can do it safely." Emma clutched the notebook like a lifeline. "I could lose my job for this," she said softly. "But those horses, especially Orion, they're worth the risk." She straightened her shoulders, showing a glimpse of steel beneath her gentle exterior. "I'll set up some hidden cameras during my next visit," Harper explained. "We'll place them where they can catch the abuse without being noticed." Emma nodded, but her hands were shaking. "Mr. Calloway has eyes everywhere. He has friends in the racing commission, in local government." "We'll be careful," Harper assured her, "and we'll gather enough evidence that they can't ignore it." As Harper left Emma's house, something made her pause on the front step. A movement caught her eye, a dark figure standing partially hidden behind a tree down the street. Her heart jumped into her throat. She hurried to her car, keeping her movements deliberate and calm despite her racing pulse. As she drove away, her hands tight on the steering wheel, Harper's determination only grew stronger. If someone was watching, it meant they were afraid. And that meant she and Emma were on the right track. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Harper's clinic as she carefully packed her medical bag. Her hands moved methodically, checking each instrument while her mind raced with anticipation. Hidden beneath her stethoscope and supplies lay a small camera, no bigger than a matchbox. Lily hovered nearby, her face etched with worry. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Harper? Calloway isn't someone you want as an enemy." Harper paused, looking up at her assistant of 5 years. "I can't ignore what's happening to those horses, Lily. Someone has to stand up for them." "Just be careful," Lily said, squeezing Harper's shoulder. "Call me the minute you leave there." The drive to Calloway's stables felt longer than usual. Harper rehearsed her cover story in her mind, a simple follow-up visit to check Orion's progress. Nothing suspicious about that. When she arrived, the stable yard was already bustling with activity. Grooms led horses to and from the training track, their hooves clicking against the concrete. Harper grabbed her bag and walked purposefully toward the main stable block. "Dr. Harper," Emma greeted her quietly, leading her to Orion's stall. The magnificent horse nickered softly at Harper's approach. "Just need to check how he's responding to treatment," Harper announced loudly, for the benefit of anyone listening. She began her examination, running her hands along Orion's flanks while carefully watching for any observers. After completing the checkup, Harper made her way to the supply room, clutching her medical bag. "I need to wash up," she explained to a passing stable hand. Once inside, she quickly surveyed the room. The corner above the chemical storage cabinet provided the perfect vantage point. With swift, practiced movements, she retrieved the camera and secured it in place. As she walked back through the stable block, voices drifted from around the corner, one unmistakably Calloway's, the other belonging to an older groomer Harper had seen before. "I won't do it anymore," the groomer was saying, his voice trembling with anger. "These shortcuts you're taking, they're killing these horses." "You'll do as you're told," Calloway snapped, "or you can find yourself another job. There are plenty who will keep their mouths shut for a paycheck." Harper forced herself to keep walking at a steady pace, her face neutral despite her racing heart. She nodded to the stable hands she passed, signed out at the office, and walked calmly to her car. Only when she was safely inside did she allow herself to take a deep breath. The camera was in place. Now they just needed to wait for the evidence to come in. That evening, Harper sat in her dimly lit clinic office, her hands trembling slightly as she connected the tiny camera to her computer. The faint hum of the old desktop filled the quiet room as the screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of the supply room. She fast-forwarded through hours of mundane activity, people walking back and forth carrying feed bags and equipment, until a figure caught her attention. A stable hand she didn't recognize entered the frame, carrying a large bottle filled with clear liquid. His movements were furtive, glancing over his shoulder as he walked. Harper leaned closer, her heart pounding against her ribs as she watched intently while the man disappeared from view, only to return minutes later, heading toward Orion's stall. The camera's microphone picked up his muttering, the sound scratchy but clear enough to make out the words. "Boss wants him lighter before the race. Whatever it takes." The stable hand's words sent chills down Harper's spine as she watched him apply the liquid to Orion's magnificent coat, his actions quick and practiced. Harper immediately called Emma and Lily, asking them to come to the clinic. The night had grown darker by the time they arrived, and within 30 minutes they huddled around her desk, watching the damning footage. The small office felt even more cramped with the three of them squeezed together. "Oh, God," Lily whispered, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. "They're actually doing this on purpose." Emma's face had gone pale, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her work shirt. "I've seen them do this to other horses, too," she admitted, wringing her hands. "Lightning strike last season, and summer storm before that." I wanted to say something, but she trailed off, tears welling in her eyes, her voice catching. Who would believe me without proof? Harper placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder, feeling the younger woman trembling beneath her touch. "This is good evidence, but it's not enough to bring down Calloway. We need to prove he's the one behind these orders." "The stable hand mentioned the boss," Lily pointed out, a hint of hope in her voice. "That's something, right?" Harper shook her head, her expression grim. "Calloway's lawyers would tear that apart in seconds. We need concrete proof. Documents, direct orders, something that ties him directly to these practices. Something he can't wiggle out of." Emma nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. That could take weeks, maybe months. Calloway keeps most of his paperwork locked in his office, and he's really careful about who gets access. Then that's how long it takes, Harper said firmly, her jaw set with determination. She turned to Emma, her expression serious but gentle. But you need to be extremely careful now. Calloway's not stupid. He'll be watching for any signs of disloyalty. Don't do anything that might make him suspicious. What should I do? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper, fear evident in her eyes. Keep doing your job normally, Harper advised, giving Emma's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Document everything you see, but don't take risks. We'll figure out our next move together. The next morning, Harper arrived early at her clinic, her mind racing with plans even as she treated a neighbor's elderly cat. Between appointments, she'd drive past Calloway stables, taking mental notes of the comings and goings. Her careful observations revealed a pattern. Chemical deliveries arrived every Tuesday morning, always when Calloway was away at business meetings. On the second day, as Harper pulled into the stable's gravel driveway for what she claimed was a routine check on Orion, she found Calloway waiting for her. He stood near the entrance, his expensive suit out of place among the hay and dirt, his arms crossed over his chest. "Dr. Harper," he called out, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "This is your third visit this week. Is there something wrong with my horse that you're not telling me?" Harper kept her expression neutral as she gathered her medical bag from the passenger seat. "Mr. Calloway, I always follow up thoroughly with cases like Orion's. Chemical burns can be tricky to treat." She emphasized the word chemical, watching his face carefully. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Burns? I thought we established those were simple allergies." "I like to monitor any unusual conditions closely," Harper replied smoothly, though her heart hammered in her chest. "It's just good veterinary practice." As she walked toward Orion's stall, she felt Calloway's eyes boring into her back. The atmosphere in the stable had changed. Where before the workers had simply avoided her gaze, now they watched her openly, tracking her movements. Later that afternoon, Emma managed to slip Harper a folded piece of paper while pretending to ask about proper feeding schedules. Harper tucked it carefully into her pocket, waiting until she was in her car to read it. The note listed several chemical names, including a powerful bleaching agent that was banned in most racing circuits. As Harper drove home that evening, she noticed a black SUV in her rearview mirror. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, but after 3 turns, the vehicle was still there, matching her speed exactly. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she made a sudden turn onto Main Street, where the evening shoppers filled the sidewalks. The SUV followed. Taking deep breaths to stay calm, Harper merged into the busy traffic, weaving between cars until she spotted the entrance to the mall parking garage. She quickly turned in, drove through the garage, and exited on the other side, watching with relief as the SUV disappeared from her mirrors. By the time Harper reached home, her hands were shaking. She double-checked all her doors and windows before sinking into her favorite armchair, the reality of what she was up against finally hitting her full force. But as she sat there, looking at Emma's note with its damning list of chemicals, her fear gradually gave way to renewed determination. These horses needed her, and she wouldn't back down. Harper sat at her kitchen table in the dim light of dawn, spreading out photos, notes, and video stills like pieces of a complex puzzle. Steam rose from her coffee cup as she studied the footage from the hidden camera. The grainy images showed stable hands applying suspicious chemicals to Orion's coat, but Calloway remained conspicuously absent from every frame. "It's not enough," she muttered, running her fingers through her uncombed hair. The evidence proved abuse was happening, but nothing directly tied it to Calloway. He was too careful, too calculated to leave an obvious trail. Later that afternoon, Harper drove to the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop 20 minutes from the stables. She chose a quiet corner booth, away from windows. Emma arrived moments later, her face drawn with worry as she slid into the seat across from Harper. "Thank you for meeting me," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know about Orion." Harper leaned forward, noting the tremor in Emma's hands as she clutched her coffee cup. "Callaway's entering him in the Memorial Day Classic," Emma continued. "It's in 2 weeks. The horse isn't ready. Those chemicals have weakened him. His skin's so sensitive now, and he flinches at the slightest touch." Tears welled in her eyes. "If they race him like this, it could kill him." Harper's stomach clenched. 2 weeks? That's not nearly enough time for his injuries to heal properly. "Callaway doesn't care. He's got too much money riding on this race. I heard him say he'd rather run Orion into the ground than scratch him from the lineup." Harper's mind raced with possibilities. The race deadline changed everything. They couldn't afford to move slowly anymore. "We need more concrete evidence," she said, pulling out a small notebook. "And we need it fast." Back at her clinic that evening, Harper sketched a rough layout of the stable complex. She marked 3 crucial spots where additional cameras could capture damning evidence: the medicine storage room, the main stable area, and most importantly, Callaway's office. The office was the riskiest location, but also the most likely to yield proof of his direct involvement. She opened her laptop and ordered 3 more tiny cameras, paying extra for overnight shipping. As she entered her credit card information, her hand hesitated over the Confirm Purchase button. The reality of what she was planning hit her hard. Trespassing, surveillance, possibly breaking and entering. Her veterinary license, her reputation, her entire career could be destroyed if she was caught. Harper closed her eyes and remembered Orion's gentle face, the way he trembled when touched, the chemical burns hidden beneath his once beautiful coat. The image steeled her resolve. She clicked Confirm and began plotting how to install the cameras without being detected. Her professional ethics had always been her compass, but now they were leading her down a path that could cost her everything she'd worked for. Still, as she reviewed her plans one more time, Harper knew she couldn't walk away. Some prices were worth paying to do what was right. The morning sun had barely risen when Harper pulled into Callaway's stables. A cool breeze carried the scent of hay and leather as she grabbed her medical bag from the passenger seat. Her heart thumped against her ribs. The tiny cameras felt like burning secrets inside her coat pocket. Inside the main stable, she found Callaway barking orders at his staff. His expensive suit looked out of place among the hay and dirt. "Pick up the pace. That horse needs to be ready for next week," Callaway shouted at a young stable hand who was cleaning Orion's stall. "Dr. Harper," he said, turning to face her with barely concealed irritation. "I trust this is a quick visit?" "Just a routine follow-up," Harper replied, keeping her voice steady. "I want to make sure Orion's recovery is on track." Callaway checked his watch. "Make it fast. We have training scheduled." While examining Orion, Harper's concern deepened. His once gleaming coat had lost its luster, hanging dull and lifeless. When she ran her hands along his flanks, she felt him trembling. His eyes, usually bright and alert, seemed glazed with exhaustion. "Mr. Callaway," she called out, "I need to check something in my records. Would you mind if I used your office for a moment?" Callaway waved his hand dismissively, already focused on berating another worker about training schedules. Harper slipped into his office, her hand shaking slightly as she retrieved one of the tiny cameras. She positioned it carefully behind a trophy on the highest shelf, angling it to capture the entire room. Back in the stable area, she waited until Callaway stormed off to take a phone call before placing another camera near Orion's stall. The device was barely bigger than a button, hidden in the shadow of a support beam. As she finished her examination, Harper struggled to maintain her professional demeanor. Orion's condition had deteriorated significantly since her last visit. His movements were sluggish, and he barely responded to her gentle touch, a far cry from the spirited horse she'd first met. "Everything looks fine," she lied to Calloway when he returned, knowing she needed to protect her investigation. "Just keep following the treatment plan we discussed." Walking back to her car, Harper's chest felt tight with guilt. Every step away from Orion felt like a betrayal. She'd sworn an oath to prevent animal suffering, yet here she was, leaving him in the hands of people who were slowly destroying him. But she knew that acting too soon, without enough evidence, would only make things worse. As she started her car, Harper watched Calloway in her rearview mirror, still shouting orders and checking his watch. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, silently promising Orion she would gather enough proof to save him before the race. Harper sat in her dimly lit home office, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen as she reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. Her hands trembled as she took notes, documenting every damning detail. The video from Calloway's office showed him in crystal clear detail, gesturing angrily at two stable hands. "I don't care what it takes," Calloway's voice crackled through the speakers. "Use the special mix we discussed. Make him shine for the investors tomorrow, and double the dose. We need to mask those injuries before anyone else notices." Harper's stomach churned as she watched the stable hands nod submissively. She fast-forwarded through hours of footage until another clip caught her attention. Calloway personally instructing someone on mixing chemicals in the supply room, pointing to specific bottles and demonstrating measurements. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. It was Emma. 20 minutes later, they met at their usual spot, a quiet corner of the local diner. Emma's face was pale, her fingers fidgeting with her coffee cup. "He's getting paranoid," Emma whispered, glancing around the nearly empty diner. "This morning, he installed new locks on the stable doors. Only certain staff members can get near the horses now." She took a shaky breath. "I'm still on the approved list, but he's watching everyone like a hawk." Harper reached across the table and squeezed Emma's trembling hand. "We can stop if you're too scared. I understand." "No," Emma said firmly, though her voice quivered. "I won't abandon Orion, or the other horses, but—" She lowered her voice even further. "I'm terrified of getting caught." Harper nodded, understanding the young woman's fear. After saying goodbye to Emma, she drove to the local newspaper office. The building was quiet at this hour, with only a few dedicated journalists still at their desks. She found Alex Marshall in his small office, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. "Dr. Harper," Alex said, standing to greet her. "What brings you here so late?" Harper closed the door behind her and pulled out a USB drive. "I need your help, Alex. I have evidence of animal abuse at Calloway Stables, documented proof of illegal chemical use on racehorses." Alex's expression turned serious as Harper explained the situation. He watched several clips from the footage, taking detailed notes. "This is solid evidence," he said finally, looking up at Harper. "But you need to understand something. Calloway practically owns this town. He has judges in his pocket, politicians on speed dial." He leaned forward, his face grave. "If we run this story, things could get ugly. Dangerous even." "I understand," Harper replied. "But these horses need help. Will you help me expose this?" Alex studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Yes, but we'll need to be smart about this. Very smart." The morning sun cast long shadows across the stable yard as Harper pulled into her usual parking spot. Her medical bag felt heavier than usual, weighed down by the knowledge of what she had to do. The air was thick with tension as she made her way to the main stable. Several workers glanced her way, their faces tight with worry. They quickly looked away when she tried to meet their eyes. The usual friendly chatter was replaced by hushed whispers and the soft nickering of horses. "Dr. Harper," Calloway's voice boomed from behind her. "Another visit so soon?" Harper turned, forcing a professional smile. "Just following up on Orion's treatment plan, Mr. Calloway. We want him in top shape for the upcoming race, don't we?" Calloway's eyes lingered on her face longer than comfortable, searching for something. "Indeed," he said slowly. "Make it quick. We're busy today." Harper made her way to Orion's stall, her skin crawling under Calloway's watchful gaze. She pretended to check the horse's vitals while planning her route to retrieve the hidden cameras. When Calloway finally turned away, Harper slipped into the supply room. Just as she reached for the first camera, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Her heart jumped into her throat as she ducked into an empty stall, pressing herself against the wall. A stable hand walked by, whistling softly. Harper held her breath until the sound faded. Her hands trembled as she quickly gathered the remaining cameras, tucking them into her medical bag. Passing Orion's stall on her way out, she noticed the change in his behavior. The usually calm horse pawed anxiously at the ground, his ears pinned back. Every slight noise made him flinch, and his once bright eyes were dull with stress. Back in her clinic, Harper connected the cameras to her computer. The footage started playing, showing various angles of the stable's daily operations. Then, a heated exchange caught her attention. "I won't do it anymore," a groomer was saying, his voice shaking. "The chemicals are hurting him. You can see how much pain he's in." Calloway's face appeared in the frame, red with anger. "You'll do exactly what I tell you to do," he snarled. "Mix the solution stronger this time. Double it. I don't care if it burns. We need him looking perfect for the buyers." "But sir—" "Do it, or you're fired. And trust me, you won't work with horses again in this state or any other." Calloway jabbed his finger at the groomer's chest. "Now get to work. Use the new formula I showed you, and don't skimp on the application." Harper's hands clenched into fists as she watched. Here it was, undeniable proof of Calloway directly ordering the abuse. She quickly backed up the footage to multiple drives, her heart pounding with equal parts relief and anger. Harper's clinic was quiet as she led Alex through the back entrance. The evening shadows stretched across the empty examination room where her laptop sat ready. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed play. "Watch this," she said, pointing to the screen where Calloway's angry face filled the frame. Alex leaned forward, his expression growing darker as the footage played. When it ended, he straightened up and ran a hand through his hair. "This is exactly what we needed, Harper. Clear evidence of direct orders for abuse." He paused, his face serious. "But you need to understand, Calloway won't take this lying down. He's got friends in high places, and he'll come at you with everything he's got." Harper's stomach tightened. What about Emma? She could lose everything. We can protect her identity, but Calloway will figure it out. He'll know who helped you. Alex placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Before Harper could answer, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Her heart pounding, she answered and put it on speaker. "Dr. Harper," a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "This is your only warning. Stay out of things that don't concern you. Some doors are better left closed." The line went dead. Harper's hands shook as she set the phone down. "I need to talk to Lily," she whispered. Minutes later, Lily arrived at the clinic, her face etched with concern as Harper recounted the threatening call. "You're doing the right thing," Lily said firmly, pulling Harper into a tight hug. "But please be careful. These people, they play dirty." "I know," Harper replied, her voice steadier than she felt. That's why I need to make copies of everything." She sat at her computer, creating digital copies of all the evidence. With trembling fingers, she sent separate files to Alex, Lily, and Emma, labeling them clearly with instructions. Later that night, Harper lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Orion's frightened face, his skin raw from the chemicals. She remembered how he flinched at every touch, the way his eyes had lost their spark. Sleep wouldn't come. The weight of tomorrow's decisions pressed heavily on her chest. But with each remembered image of Orion's suffering, her determination grew stronger. The race was approaching fast, and she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Harper sat at her desk early that morning, surrounded by medical charts and notes, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Her fingers traced the progression of Orion's deteriorating condition, documented in her careful handwriting, each entry more concerning than the last. The morning light filtered through her office window, casting long shadows across the scattered papers as she studied the troubling patterns: elevated heart rate, muscle tension, and those persistent chemical burns that refused to heal despite her best efforts. The evidence was damning, but somehow still not enough. Her phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. Emma's text made her heart skip. "Callaway just announced, Orion races in 2 days." The words seemed to blur before her eyes as panic set in. Harper's hands grew cold, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. 2 days. It wasn't nearly enough time. She quickly dialed Alex's number, pacing back and forth across the worn carpet as she waited for him to pick up, her free hand running anxiously through her hair. "Alex, we're running out of time," she said as soon as he answered, her voice tight with urgency. "Callaway's entering Orion in the race this weekend. The horse isn't ready. He could break down on the track. We can't let that happen." "I hear you," Alex replied, his voice tight with concern. "But we need something more concrete to make this story bulletproof. Something that will shock people into action. The public needs irrefutable proof." "What more do you need? We have the footage." Harper's frustration leaked into her voice as she gestured at nothing. "We need Callaway himself," Alex interrupted firmly. "His own words admitting to what he's doing. Without that, his lawyers will try to pin everything on the stable hands. You know how these things work." Emma's voice suddenly came through the speaker. Harper hadn't realized she was on the call too. "I can do it," she said firmly, with unexpected determination. "I can get him to talk. He's been agitated lately, barking orders at everyone. If I catch him in the right moment, when his guard is down—" "Emma, no," Harper protested, her protective instincts flaring. "It's too dangerous. If he catches you, we don't know what he might do." "I know these stables better than anyone," Emma insisted, a new confidence in her voice. "I know when he's alone, where he goes to make private calls. I can do this. I have to do this. For Orion." Harper closed her eyes, her stomach churning with worry. "Please be careful, Emma. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Promise me." That night, Harper lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing across her ceiling, cast by passing car headlights. 2 days, just 2 days to save Orion. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought of Orion in his stall, his once proud spirit dimmed by pain and mistreatment. If they failed, if Emma couldn't get the evidence they needed, the consequences would be devastating. Harper turned onto her side, clutching her pillow tightly as she tried to push away images of Orion breaking down on the track, his weakened body giving out under the strain of racing. The ticking of her bedside clock seemed to mock her with each passing second. Sleep felt impossible, with so much at stake, with the lives of both Orion and Emma hanging precariously in the balance. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the stable yard as Emma began her daily routine, her heart pounding against the small recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. She moved methodically through her tasks, sweeping the concrete floor near Calloway's office with deliberate slowness, straining to catch every word from behind the half-open door. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but she forced herself to maintain a calm exterior. The familiar sounds of the stable, horses nickering, hooves shuffling against straw, the distant whinny of Orion, helped steady her nerves. Calloway's voice suddenly boomed from his office, making Emma jump. "I don't care what it takes. That horse needs to look perfect for this race." Heavy footsteps approached, and Emma quickly busied herself with reorganizing feed buckets as Calloway emerged, a groomer trailing behind him. "But sir," the groomer protested weakly, "the chemicals you want us to use, they're burning his skin." "Did I ask for your opinion?" Calloway's face reddened with anger. "Those chemicals work. They make his coat shine, and they'll mask any signs of weakness. And keep restricting his feed. I want him light for race day." The vet said, "I don't care what that nosy vet said," Calloway snapped. "Use whatever chemicals necessary, double the dose if you have to. And if anyone asks questions, you know nothing. Understood?" Emma's fingers pressed against the recorder in her pocket, ensuring it was still running as she pretended to examine a nearby saddle. Her stomach churned as she listened to Calloway detail more instructions for Orion's preparation. When Calloway finally stormed off, Emma waited several minutes before slipping away to the tack room. Her hand shook as she checked the recorder, tears welling in her eyes as she confirmed it had captured everything. That evening, Emma's old pickup truck rattled into Harper's driveway. She found Harper waiting at the door, concern etched across her face. Inside Harper's office, Emma handed over the recorder with trembling fingers. Harper plugged the device into her computer and pressed play. The color drained from her face as Calloway's cruel words filled the room. Emma hugged herself tightly, fighting back tears as they listened to the damning evidence. "You did it, Emma," Harper whispered, squeezing the young woman's hand. "This is exactly what we needed." With shaking fingers, Harper copied the file and sent it to Alex along with a brief message. His response came quickly. "This is perfect. Story goes live tomorrow morning. Get some rest. You're both going to need it." The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Harper's phone exploded with notifications. Alex's story had broken, spreading across local news websites and social media like wildfire. The headline blazed across her screen. "Award-winning racehorse subjected to chemical abuse at prestigious Calloway stables." Harper scrolled through the article, her heart racing as she read Alex's masterful presentation of their evidence. The recordings, photos, and video footage painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse. Within hours, major animal welfare organizations were issuing statements and calling for immediate investigations. The clinic's phone rang constantly. News vans parked outside, their crews hoping to catch a statement from the whistleblowing veterinarian. Harper kept the doors locked, treating only emergency cases while the storm raged outside. Around noon, the clinic's front door burst open with such force that the bell nearly flew off. Calloway stormed in, his face purple with rage, sending patients and their owners scrambling to the corners of the waiting room. "You snake!" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Harper. "You've destroyed everything I've built." Harper stood her ground behind the reception desk, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You destroyed it yourself, Mr. Calloway, when you chose to abuse those horses." "I'll sue you for every penny you're worth." He slammed his fist on the counter. "When I'm done with you, you won't be able to practice in this state, or any other." "The evidence speaks for itself," Harper replied firmly. "Every word in that article is true." and you know it." Calloway's eyes burned with hatred. "You'll regret this," he snarled, before storming out, nearly knocking over an elderly woman with her cat carrier. Harper's hand shook as she helped the frightened woman to her feet. She had just finished calming her remaining patients when Lily burst through the back door. "Harper, come quick!" Behind the clinic, shattered glass glittered in the sunlight. Every window had been smashed, and inside, equipment lay scattered and broken across the floor. Examination tables were overturned and medicines spilled across the linoleum. Harper stood in the midst of the destruction, her throat tight. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Are you okay? I saw Calloway leaving the clinic." "I'm fine," Harper typed back, though her fingers trembled. "But the clinic—" "He'll come after me next," Emma replied. "I'm scared." Harper called Emma immediately. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We knew this might happen, but we have the truth on our side, and we have proof. Don't let him intimidate you." After hanging up, Harper surveyed the damage with Lily. Together, they began picking up broken glass and righting overturned furniture. Lily's quiet determination helped steady Harper's nerves. "He thinks he can scare us into silence," Harper said, sweeping up another pile of glass. "But this just proves how desperate he is." Lily nodded, carefully collecting scattered medical supplies. "We'll get through this together." The truth had to come out. The clinic's bell chimed softly as a tall woman with silver-streaked hair walked in. Her weathered face and confident stride spoke of years spent around horses. "Dr. Harper, I'm Marla Davidson," she said, extending her hand. "I used to work for Calloway Stables." Harper's eyes widened with recognition. "The trainer who left 3 years ago?" Marla nodded, her expression grim. "I've been following the news. What you've uncovered. It's exactly why I left. I couldn't stand watching him abuse those beautiful animals anymore." "You'd be willing to testify about what you saw?" Harper asked, hope rising in her chest. "That's why I'm here," Marla said firmly. "I've kept detailed records of everything I witnessed. I was too scared to come forward alone. But now, well, you've given me the courage." Within the hour, Harper and Marla sat in the local animal welfare office, spreading documents across a conference table. Marla's records painted a devastating picture of systematic abuse spanning years. "These training logs show clear patterns," Marla explained to the agency director. "Horses pushed beyond their limits, illegal substances, deliberate injury cover-ups." The director, a stern-faced woman named Janet, studied the documents carefully. "This is compelling evidence. We'll send inspectors first thing tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Harper leaned forward anxiously. "Calloway's already trying to cover his tracks. He'll hide everything before they arrive." Janet sighed. "Unfortunately, that's all we can do within protocol. I suggest you both document anything else you observe between now and then." Back at the clinic, Harper met with Emma and Marla to discuss their options. Orion's medical file lay open on her desk, showing increasingly concerning vital signs. "He can't race," Harper said, pointing to the latest test results. "These numbers show severe strain. One more race could kill him." Marla studied the records, her face darkening. "Calloway won't care. He'll run that horse into the ground if it means winning." Emma twisted her hands nervously. "We have to stop him. But how?" The three women huddled over Harper's desk, sketching out ideas as the sun sank lower in the sky. Harper kept glancing at Orion's medical file, each glance strengthening her resolve. They had less than 24 hours to save him from a potentially fatal race. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty cafe as Harper, Emma, and Marla huddled around a corner table, their faces etched with concern. Steam rose from their untouched coffee cups while they spoke in hushed voices, occasionally glancing toward the door to ensure no one was within earshot. "The race officials need to see this evidence," Marla said, spreading out copies of medical records and photographs across the worn wooden table. "Some of them are old friends from my training days. They might listen if we present this the right way." Harper shook her head, her fingers drumming nervously on the table's scratched surface. "Calloway's donated millions to the racing circuit over the years. He's got half the board in his pocket, and they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them." "She's right," Emma added softly, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth. "I've heard him bragging about his connections at every major event. He treats it like his personal playground." They fell silent as a waitress with tired eyes refilled their cups, offering a practiced smile. Once she left, Harper pulled out a small notebook and drew a rough map of the racetrack, her veterinarian's precision evident in every stroke. "I'll position myself here, near the paddock," Harper explained, marking an X on her sketch with determined pressure. "That way I can monitor Orion's condition right up until race time. If anything seems wrong, I'll be close enough to intervene." Emma leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. "I can keep watch at the stables. Calloway usually arrives early on race days to give his special instructions. I'll text you if anything seems off or if he tries something suspicious." Marla nodded approvingly, her weathered hands sorting through the evidence. "I know at least 3 other trainers who've complained about Calloway's methods in private. Let me make some calls. We need all the support we can get. Safety in numbers." They spent the next hour refining their plan, assigning backup positions, and exchanging emergency contact numbers, their determination growing with each detail they hammered out. The cafe slowly filled with morning customers, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the serious conversation in the corner, forcing them to wrap up their meeting. As Harper drove home that evening, her mind raced through their preparations, checking and rechecking every detail. A flash of headlights in her rearview mirror caught her attention, making her stomach clench. A black SUV with tinted windows hung back several car lengths, matching her every turn with unsettling precision. Her heart pounding against her ribs, Harper took a sharp right onto a side street, hoping she was just being paranoid. The SUV followed. She made several random turns through a residential area, past neat rows of houses with warm, glowing windows, but the vehicle stayed with her like a shadow. Finally, she pulled into a busy shopping center, weaving through the rows of parked cars until she found an exit on the opposite side, her hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. When she checked her mirror again, the SUV was gone, melted away into the evening traffic. Harper released her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. This wasn't just about saving Orion anymore. They were up against something far more dangerous than she'd imagined, and Calloway's influence clearly reached further than any of them had suspected. The first rays of dawn crept through Harper's bedroom window as she jolted awake, her heart already racing. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night with thoughts of Orion. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up with multiple notifications. "Got 3 trainers on board," Marla's first message read. "They're willing to speak up about similar incidents they've witnessed." Harper's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the rest of Marla's updates. More allies were emerging, respected figures in the racing community who'd stayed silent about Calloway's practices for too long. Their support could make all the difference. She jumped out of bed and began gathering her supplies with practiced efficiency. Her veterinary bag was already packed with basic medical equipment. She added her camera, extra memory cards, and a thick folder of documentation they'd collected. Every piece of evidence needed to be ready. The morning air was crisp as Harper loaded her car, her breath forming small clouds in the early light. She double-checked everything one last time before heading to the racetrack, her stomach tight with anticipation. Meanwhile, at the stables, Emma moved quietly between the stalls, pretending to do her morning chores. Her heart pounded as she watched Calloway's staff bustle around Orion's stall. Through the gaps in the wooden slats, she could see them preparing the horse for the race. A groomer entered the stall with something concealed in his hand. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the glint of a syringe. Carefully, she pulled out her phone and positioned it through a gap in the boards. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed record. The footage was clear. The groomer administered an injection into Orion's leg while others held the horse still. Calloway appeared moments later, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor. "Make sure he runs today," Calloway ordered, his voice sharp. "I don't care what it takes. He needs to place in this race, understand?" Emma kept filming as the staff nodded obediently. Calloway continued giving instructions, each word more damning than the last. When they finally moved away from Orion's stall, Emma's hands were trembling so badly she could barely send the video to Harper. Harper had just pulled into the racetrack parking lot when her phone chimed with Emma's message. She parked quickly and opened the video, her stomach churning as she watched the scene unfold. The injection, Calloway's callous orders, it was worse than she'd feared. Orion couldn't be allowed to race in this condition. Whatever they'd given him could cause serious harm, or even prove fatal under the stress of competition. She grabbed her medical bag and evidence folder, her mind racing. They needed to act fast. The race was scheduled to start in less than 2 hours, and every minute counted. Harper and Marla rushed through the growing crowd at the racetrack, clutching their folders of evidence. They found the official's office, where 3 men in suits were reviewing the morning's racing schedule. "You need to see this immediately," Harper said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. She spread out the photos of Orion's chemical burns and pulled up the video Emma had just sent. The head official, Mr. Peterson, leaned forward to watch, his expression growing troubled. "This is concerning, Dr. Harper, but Mr. Calloway is a respected owner. These are serious accusations." "We have multiple witnesses," Marla added, stepping forward. "I worked for Calloway. I've seen his methods firsthand." The officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We'll need time to review this properly," one said, shuffling papers on his desk. Harper checked her watch. Less than an hour until the race. The preparation area was filling with spectators and media crews. She knew she couldn't wait for bureaucracy to grind forward. "If you won't act, I will," she declared, striding out of the office. Harper marched straight to the prep area where horses were being readied for the race. Television cameras swung in her direction as she raised her voice. "This horse cannot race today. I have evidence of illegal substances being administered this morning." The crowd fell silent. Phones came out, recording her words. Several reporters moved closer, microphones extended. "I'm Dr. Harper, Orion's veterinarian," she continued, her voice carrying across the area. "This horse has been subjected to chemical burns and just received an unauthorized injection. Racing him would be dangerous and cruel." The commotion drew more attention. Race officials hurried from their office, looking panicked. Mr. Peterson grabbed Harper's arm. "Dr. Harper, please, look at these photos." She held up the images of Orion's burns. "This is documented abuse." Right then, 3 inspectors from the Animal Welfare Agency pushed through the crowd, badges displayed. "We received your evidence submission," the lead inspector said. "We're here to examine the horse." Calloway appeared, his face red with fury. He jabbed a finger at Harper. "This is sabotage. She's trying to ruin me." "The video evidence shows you ordering illegal substances to be administered," Harper shot back, standing her ground. The lead inspector stepped between them. "Mr. Calloway, we're ordering an immediate examination of your horse. He cannot race until we complete our investigation." "You can't do this," Calloway shouted, but the inspector held up his badge. "We can, and we are. Please step aside, or we'll have security escort you away from the area." The tension at the racetrack shattered when a loud thud echoed from Orion's stall. Harper's head whipped around at the sound of distressed whinnying. She rushed over, her heart dropping at the sight of the magnificent horse collapsed on his side, his legs trembling uncontrollably. "Everyone back!" Harper shouted, pushing through the gathering crowd. Orion's breathing was rapid and shallow, his coat damp with sweat. His eyes rolled wildly, showing their whites. "The drug is causing severe systemic shock," she announced, quickly checking his vital signs. Harper pulled emergency supplies from her medical bag while calling out instructions to the stable hands. "I need clean water and towels now." Her hands moved swiftly, preparing an injection to counteract the performance enhancer. "You're being ridiculous!" Calloway pushed forward, his face mottled with rage. "He's fine, just excited about the race. Get him up." "Stop right there!" Harper's voice cracked like a whip. "This horse is in critical condition because of what you've done to him." Emma suddenly emerged from the crowd, her phone held high. "I have proof." Her voice shook, but grew stronger with each word. "I recorded everything this morning, Mr. Calloway, ordering the injection, telling them to hide the evidence." She turned to the inspectors. "He knew it was dangerous. He didn't care." The video played clearly on her phone's screen, Calloway's voice unmistakable as he gave the damning orders. The crowd murmured in shock, and several people filmed Emma's revelation with their phones. "She's lying!" Calloway lunged toward Emma, but security guards grabbed his arms. The lead inspector stepped forward, his face grim. "Mr. Calloway, you need to come with us. We have some questions about these allegations." He nodded to his colleagues. "Search the stable office and medical supply room. Document everything." As two officers led a protesting Calloway away, Harper focused entirely on Orion. She administered the stabilizing medication while gently stroking his neck, speaking in soothing tones. "Easy, boy. You're going to be okay now." The horse's breathing gradually steadied, though his legs still trembled. Emma knelt beside Harper, tears in her eyes. "Will he make it?" "Yes," Harper said firmly, checking his pulse again. "But he'll need time to recover from what they've done to him." She looked up as the inspectors returned with boxes of medical supplies and records. Seeing Calloway's treatment logs being carried away filled her with relief. But her heart ached as she turned back to the suffering animal beside her. Harper settled in next to Orion, knowing she wouldn't leave his side until she was certain he was stable. She pressed a hand against his heaving flank, feeling each labored breath. The morning's chaos faded into background noise as she focused solely on helping this beautiful creature heal from the abuse he'd endured. The morning sun had barely risen when Harper's phone started buzzing with notifications. Every local news station was covering the story of Calloway's arrest. She watched as footage from Emma's phone played across her TV screen, showing Calloway ordering his staff to inject Orion with illegal substances. Alex's article had gone viral overnight, with major networks picking up the story. Social media exploded with outrage as people shared photos of Orion's chemical burns and details of the abuse. Animal rights activists gathered outside Calloway's stables, demanding justice. Harper sipped her coffee, exhausted but relieved, when her phone rang. It was Alex. "You might want to turn on Channel 5, he said. "Calloway's lawyers are making statements." On screen, a stern-faced attorney stood at a podium. Dr. Harper obtained evidence through illegal means, trespassing on private property and tampering with Mr. Calloway's business operations. We intend to pursue legal action. Harper's stomach tightened, but before she could react, Marla called. "Don't worry," Marla said firmly. "I'm heading to the police station right now to give my statement. They need to hear about what I witnessed while working for him." Emma arrived at the station shortly after, clutching a notebook filled with dated entries of Calloway's instructions and abuse. Her hands shook as she handed it to the investigators, but her voice remained steady as she described everything she'd seen. At the stables, inspectors continued their search. Behind a false wall in the supply room, they discovered crates of unlabeled chemicals and boxes of used syringes. Each item was carefully photographed and logged as evidence, building an insurmountable case against Calloway. That afternoon, Harper drove to Sweet Meadows Animal Sanctuary, where Orion had been transferred for rehabilitation. The facility sprawled across rolling hills, dotted with spacious paddocks and shady trees. She found Orion in a quiet stable, his coat already looking healthier after just one day of proper care. The horse's ears perked up at her approach. Though still weak from his ordeal, he stretched his neck toward her, nickering softly. Harper reached out to stroke his forehead, noticing how the fear had faded from his eyes. "The sanctuary vet says he's responding well to treatment," said the stable manager, Emma standing beside her with tears in her eyes. "It'll take time, but he's getting stronger every hour." Harper watched as Orion nibbled at fresh hay, his movements slow but steady. The chemical burns were beginning to heal, and his breathing had returned to normal. Though the road to recovery would be long, seeing him safe and cared for filled Harper's heart with peace. The courthouse buzzed with palpable tension as Harper took the witness stand, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. She spoke clearly and confidently, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room as she methodically described the chemical burns she'd discovered on Orion and the extensive evidence she'd gathered over months of investigation. When Emma's footage played on the courtroom screen, collective gasps echoed through the gallery, followed by murmurs of shock and disgust. The damning video showed Calloway explicitly ordering his staff to use harmful substances on the horses, his face clearly visible and his voice unmistakable as he gave the cruel instructions. Calloway sat stone-faced at the defense table, his jaw clenched tight as the prosecution presented container after container of illegal substances found at his stables. His high-priced lawyer attempted to discredit the evidence with elaborate explanations, but the documentation was thorough and damning, leaving no room for doubt. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Calloway was found guilty of multiple counts of animal cruelty and banned from any involvement in horse racing for life. His once prestigious stables would be shut down permanently, marking the end of his dynasty. Back at her clinic, Harper noticed a steady stream of new faces filling her waiting room each day. Word had spread quickly about her role in exposing Calloway's abuse, and people wanted their beloved animals treated by someone they knew they could trust. Mrs. Jenkins brought in her elderly golden retriever, Max, tears glistening in her eyes as she thanked Harper for standing up for animals who couldn't speak for themselves. The Anderson family arrived with their new rescue cat, a timid orange tabby, saying Harper's courage had inspired them to open their hearts and home to an animal in need. "We need more vets like you," Mr. Anderson said warmly, shaking her hand with genuine appreciation. "Someone who puts the animals first, no matter what the personal cost." Lily helped manage the growing influx of appointments with cheerful efficiency, beaming as she scheduled new patients and welcomed familiar faces. The clinic's reputation grew stronger with each passing day, built on Harper's demonstrated integrity and unwavering commitment to animal welfare. Meanwhile, Emma found her true calling in a way she never expected. Working alongside Marla, she helped develop comprehensive plans for a new training facility that would prioritize the horse's well-being above all else. They named it Safe Haven Stables, and Emma threw herself into learning everything she could about ethical training methods determined to make a difference in the lives of every horse that came into their care. "We'll show them that success doesn't require cruelty," Marla said with quiet conviction as they walked the sprawling property they'd chosen. The rolling hills and spacious paddocks would provide plenty of room for the horses to exercise naturally and live as they were meant to. Emma nodded, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "Every horse deserves to be treated with kindness," she said softly, thinking of how far she'd come from her days of silent witness at Callaway's stables. The gentle evening breeze carried the promise of a better tomorrow for all the animals in their care. The autumn sun cast a warm glow over the sanctuary as Harper made her way to Orion's paddock. 3 months had passed since the trial, and the transformation in the horse was remarkable. His once dull coat now gleamed like polished copper in the sunlight, his muscles strong and defined beneath healthy skin that showed no trace of the chemical burns that had once marred it. As Harper approached the fence, Orion lifted his head from grazing and nickered softly. He trotted over to her, his movements fluid and graceful, nothing like the pained shuffle she'd first witnessed at Callaway's stables. Harper's eyes welled with tears as she reached out to stroke his velvet nose. "Look at you now, beautiful boy," she whispered, running her hand along his neck. The horse pressed his head against her shoulder in a gentle greeting, and Harper's heart swelled with joy. Later that afternoon, Harper sat on a bench overlooking the sanctuary's rolling pastures. The weight of everything she'd risked, her career, her safety, her reputation, felt lighter now as she watched Orion gallop playfully with other rescued horses. Her clinic had not only survived, but thrived, with more clients than ever placing their trust in her care. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her turn. Alex approached, notebook in hand, looking as determined as ever. "I thought I might find you here," he said, settling beside her on the bench. "Just finished another piece on the positive changes in the racing industry since Callaway's conviction." Harper smiled warmly. "I couldn't have done any of this without your help, Alex. You gave us the platform we needed to expose the truth." "You did all the hard work," Alex replied. "I just helped tell the story. Speaking of which, I've been thinking about a series of articles highlighting other issues in animal welfare. Your perspective would be invaluable." They spent the next hour discussing potential topics, from puppy mills to factory farming, their shared passion for animal advocacy stronger than ever. That evening, Harper returned to her clinic to find an unexpected letter waiting on her desk. The envelope bore the logo of the American Veterinary Medical Association. Inside was an invitation to be a keynote speaker at their upcoming national conference, specifically addressing ethical practices and advocacy in veterinary care. Lily poked her head into the office. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked excitedly. "The conference invitation?" Harper nodded, still processing the significance of this recognition. "They want me to share our story," she said softly, "to help inspire other veterinarians to speak up when they witness abuse." The invitation represented more than just professional acknowledgement. It was a chance to create lasting change in her field, to encourage others to prioritize animal welfare over profit or convenience. Harper thought of Orion's recovery, of Emma and Marla's new ethical training facility, of all the positive changes that had rippled out from their decision to take a stand. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Harper pulled into the sanctuary's gravel driveway. Her heart felt heavy yet full as she watched the transport team checking their equipment and preparing the trailer for Orion's journey. The large horse sanctuary in Montana would give him hundreds of acres to roam freely with other rescued horses, a far cry from the cramped stalls of his racing days. Orion stood calmly as the handlers worked around him, his coat gleaming in the early sunlight. When he spotted Harper, his ears pricked forward and he let out a soft nicker of greeting. She approached slowly, taking in every detail of his transformed appearance. The clear, bright eyes, the proud arch of his neck, the way he stood tall and strong on legs that no longer trembled from chemical burns. "You're going to love your new home, sweet boy," Harper murmured, running her hand along his neck. Orion pressed his muzzle against her shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent. The crunch of tires on gravel announced new arrivals. Emma and Marla stepped out of their cars, both wearing bittersweet smiles as they joined Harper by Orion's side. Emma's eyes glistened with tears as she stroked the horse's forehead. "Remember how scared he used to be?" Emma said softly. "Now look at him. He's not afraid of anything anymore." Marla nodded, her expression proud. "Thanks to all of us standing up for what's right. And we're not done yet. Our new training facility already has 6 horses, all rescued from similar situations." "The industry's changing," Harper agreed. "Just last week, 3 more tracks announced stricter welfare protocols. Every small victory counts." They watched as the transport team began guiding Orion toward the trailer. He walked willingly, head held high, showing none of the anxiety that had once marked his every movement. The morning sun caught his coat, making it shine like burnished copper. "We'll keep fighting," Emma said firmly. "For every horse like Orion who needs someone to speak up for them." The transport team secured the trailer, doing final safety checks. Harper, Emma, and Marla moved to the fence line, their shoulders touching as they stood together. The engine rumbled to life, and the trailer began to move, carrying Orion toward his new life. Harper felt tears slip down her cheeks as she watched the vehicle grow smaller on the winding sanctuary road. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, carrying the sweet scent of late summer grass. Despite the ache in her heart, she smiled, knowing that Orion's story would inspire others to take a stand against cruelty. The trailer disappeared around the final bend, leaving only dust motes dancing in the morning light. Harper stood at the fence, her hand resting on the weathered wood, feeling grateful for the chance to have made a difference in one horse's life, and through him, in the lives of so many others. If you enjoyed the story of Harper and Orion, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.